Welcome everyone to the Midas Collaborative's third in a series of 3 summer webinars that are being put out by Midas. My name is Kimberly Hirsch and I'm the Executive Director of the Midas Collaborative. I'm very happy to welcome you all here today. I'd like to go over a few logistics before introducing our topics and speakers. Hopefully, you are aware that you joined a session called Legislative Solutions for Financial Challenges Exacerbated by COVID-19. We are recording today's session. Our first 2 sessions were on the housing crisis and asset building, savings, and debt during COVID-19, and were also recorded. Details for the recordings for all 3 will be made available to you. You are all defaulted to mute mode today. For any questions, please put them in the chat box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. Our team will be monitoring the chat box and will address as many of your questions towards the end of the webinar. The Midas Collaborative is a nonprofit. As a result of the generous support from sponsors, Midas is able to put on this program and others for no cost to participants. However, we rely on donations to operate throughout the year, and we thank you if you've made a donation today or may consider it in the future. I'd like to tell you a few things about the Midas Collaborative before turning it over to our other speakers today. Midas is a nonprofit with a mission focused on financial security and financial empowerment of low and moderate income residents in Massachusetts. We have 4 program pillars, which are also on our website, and you can find more information there. Our 4 areas of work include asset development programs, including match savings for low and moderate income people in partnership with community-based organizations. Number 2, we conduct various financial education programs throughout the year, including an annual summit each October, which is open to the public. We host networking and professional development events for community financial coaches, school teachers, and others working in financial education. Finally, we maintain a policy advocacy agenda and regularly advocate for policies and legislation that promote equality for lower income and working people in Massachusetts. We recently added a COVID-19 related relief agenda that includes state-level actions to bridge the gap between federal programs and what is needed. Our board of directors has been conducting strategic planning that includes a sharper focus on racial inequities in our system that have been exacerbated by the pandemic and highlighted widely in the media based on the killings of George Floyd and so many others. I would like to extend a big warm welcome to all of you today and to our speakers. We are very excited to bring together this distinguished panel representing the City of Boston, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and our national government. They'll be talking about potential legislative and policy solutions to the problems we're facing related to housing, asset building, savings, and debt. Our first speaker is Congresswoman Ayana Presley. She is an advocate, a policymaker, an activist, and a survivor. In November 2018, Congresswoman Presley was elected to represent Massachusetts' 7th Congressional District in the House of Representatives, making her the first woman of color to be elected to Congress from Massachusetts. She represents the most diverse and the most unequal district in the Commonwealth. And now I would like to turn it over to Congresswoman Presley, from whom you've all been waiting to hear. Welcome, Congresswoman Presley. Thank you for being here today. We've just done a few minutes introduction on the Midas Collaborative and on your bio, and we welcome you to speak as soon as you are ready and you can hear. You are off mute and on video. We actually can't hear you yet. I'm wondering if it's just going to take a minute for your computer to kick in. Can you try again? Nothing. Sorry about the technical difficulties, everyone. If you wouldn't mind giving us just a minute. It looks unmuted on our side. Sorry, we're not getting you yet. I've just made you co-host if you want to try again. Okay, I think she's logging out and going to try again another line. David, do you want to start on your introduction and introduce our other speakers today that we'll be moving into once we hear from Congresswoman Presley?
Sure, I'd be happy to kind of begin the introduction for the panelists that'll begin after the remarks by Congresswoman Presley. Good morning, everyone. I'm David Newville, and I'm with Prosperity Now. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Research. Oh, it looks like we might have the Congresswoman back.
We see you on video, and I've made you co-host Congresswoman Presley. Still no audio. I'm just going to toggle you on mute and unmute and see if it helps. Nothing? Do you want to try to call in by telephone? So she's saying that her microphone is not working. So I will re-email you the telephone information, Congresswoman. Well, you can stay on video if you're more than welcome to, and we'll keep trying to troubleshoot. David, do you want to continue with your introduction?
Sure, I'm happy to continue with the introduction while we're waiting for the Congresswoman to connect. So I'm David Newville. I'm with Prosperity Now, and we're a national nonprofit that works on issues of financial insecurity and wealth inequality, particularly with a lens on kind of the ever-growing racial wealth divide. And we do policy research, programmatic work in DC and across the country with our partners, and obviously including the Midas Collaborative as well in Massachusetts that we do work with on all these issues. And after the Congresswoman's remarks today, we have a fantastic panel that we're going to dive into a variety of issues related to kind of COVID-19 and the financial pressures that have been exacerbated by this health crisis, creating a financial crisis. And we will discuss a little bit kind of looking backwards at what's been done already at the federal, the state, and on the local level. And then we'll also do a forward look, kind of saying, you know, obviously right now, given what's going on in Congress, and I'm sure the Congresswoman will have thoughts on this, on the debate that's going on in the Senate right now. And then we'll go back to the House on the next round of stimulus funding and thinking about the crisis and how it might evolve the next couple months, if certain issues aren't addressed in areas such as housing, and obviously around debt, and asset building is another huge area of savings, and making sure people have, enough basic savings to keep them afloat. And our panel, we have a great panel of representatives of folks from all levels of government who will be willing to weigh in today. And the panel includes Massachusetts State Senator James Elridge, Boston City Councilor Lydia Edwards, and Sarah Kugel, who's a legislative aide for Senator Warren, who will be weighing in today.
So apologies, there appears to be a setting so that your chat is turned off, Congresswoman Presley. So I just sent an email to your scheduler with the dial-in information for the phone. David, do you want to put out the first question to the panelists, and then we'll just rotate back as needed?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So to get folks ready for the panel and kind of the first question to kind of kick us off, as I mentioned earlier, I think we're in an interesting moment right now in the crisis because there's been a lot of activity that's happened obviously since March on the government response at the federal, state, and local level, but now we're reaching a point where there needs to be a lot more responses. So we'll kick off the panel by kind of discussing, what is the current state or what are the most pressing financial issues that folks see their constituents facing right now at this moment in the crisis as we're getting into this late summer, and what have been the most effective policy responses so far at the state, local, and federal level. So we'll start with that piece to kind of get folks kind of looking at what the best practices are, what has been successful so far in kind of the government response, in addition to kind of what has been not ideal or needs to be modified. It hasn't, either it wasn't action that wasn't taken to begin with, or action that was taken that wasn't adequate enough and needs to be expanded on. And then we'll dive a little bit deeper in the panel. After that initial question, we'll get initial comments and any further introductions from each of the panelists to begin with there. And then we'll dive a little bit deeper in the panel into a couple other topic areas. As I mentioned earlier, we'll look at what's going on with housing right now. Obviously, the first of the month is coming up upon us, and millions of families are really facing the pressure of, whether they're going to be able to make that rent payment or that mortgage payment. The expanded UI has obviously been paused, at least for now, or delayed because the Senate deliberations and kind of the inability to kind of come up with a plan in time to reach that stopgap. So folks are going to be missing out on that expanded unemployment benefits. That's a huge issue as well. So we're going to look a little more closely at that. Thinking beyond housing, we're also going to look closely further questions in the panel that will look at debt. Folks who are struggling with other types of debt, obviously beyond, potential mortgage debt, but credit cards, student loans, that's another one where the federal student loans that qualify, the protections that are involved there are going to expire at the end of September, if not extended. Other types, private student loans, payday loans, folks who are forced into different types of predatory products and financial services, who don't have an alternative in order to kind of keep food on the table for their families. We're going to talk a little bit about what's being done to address those issues. Even, debt collections are another huge issue too, as we're several months into this crisis, and the folks who were fortunate to receive the original economic impact payments, not everyone has been reached still. There's still a good 8 to 12 million families that have been really difficult to reach. The lowest income and most vulnerable families, which have been very difficult to reach, who have not been able to access these payments still or are in process of accessing them. There's still a lot more work to be done there. So I'll pause there for a moment. It looks like the Congresswoman might have been able to connect by phone.
Yes, I'm here. Can you all hear me? We're just gonna have this back to.
We can hear you, but we're getting a little feedback. I think you might need to mute your computer or turn your computer speaker off. But then we are able to hear you now, though.
I apologize. This is truly just an exercise in frustration because both my microphone is muted and my video is off. So I'm not sure what is going on. I'm going to exit out of this. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm just going to close everything out and exhale for a moment here and, you know, just to bring into the space a colleague and mentor, Representative John Lewis, who I'll be, after this, going to have a quiet visitation with. And it's very apropos that this would be my final meeting heading into this time with the Congressman, because his entire life was about the pursuit of justice. And so I thank all of you for the invitation to participate in this panel this afternoon. I wish that I could participate for the duration. I hope there will be other opportunities to do that. I'm grateful to everyone at the Midas Collective. You've been just working so hard to uplift not only housing justice, the many housing issues that have been exacerbated during this pandemic. We know they're not new. They've just been laid to bear and further exacerbated in this moment. And all the other financial insecurity issues, again, that this pandemic has brought a renewed spotlight to. And it's exactly why, upon my election to Congress, I lobbied to be appointed to the Financial Services Committees that I could address all of these issues, from housing to homelessness to unbanked to underbanking to student loan debt. And so as we gather today, we must keep in mind that we are only 4 days away from another month of rent being due. And although this Democratic majority House has advanced bipartisan relief bills, and the HEROES Act specifically almost 2 months ago, which would provide critical resources and the protections, this Senate, which I'm not sure if they are just, this GOP-led Senate, if they are clueless, cruel, calloused, or all three, but they seem to be very removed from the struggle and the hardship that our families are experiencing because of their failure to act and to abdicate their responsibility to meet the scale and scope of this crisis. And, you know, furthermore, in that the hurt is being felt by everyone, the recovery must be just and must be equitable and be felt by everyone. And you all are well aware of the old adage that when the rest of the country catches a cold, Black folks catch pneumonia. That is as literal as it is metaphorical. And so, you know, in that vein, I certainly don't want to sugarcoat anything about the work that lies ahead for all of us. And I do think it's important to continue to elevate those racial disparities, particularly at a moment of reckoning as a nation around racial justice issues. And Reverend William Barber aptly reminds us that in the midst of this reckoning, it is positioning us for a third reconstruction, if you will. None of us want to return to the status quo normal, which was unjust, insufficient, and inadequate to begin with. And so even in the midst of this pandemic, and especially so, it's important that we continue to build community, to continue to coalition and to movement build, and to support each other, because we can't allow this pandemic to hinder those mobilization efforts in pursuit of a fairer and more just and equitable world. And so that is why we must prohibit banks from seizing customer stimulus checks to pay debts owed to the bank or overdraft fees. And if we act on our shared belief that housing is foundational to healthy families and healthy communities, that it is a human right, then we need a housing eviction moratorium for the duration of this crisis. And we need government assistance to stem the understandable fear people have that they will be required to pay some sort of balloon payment at the end of this crisis. When I was elected, and rather after I took my oath of office, my class has the humbling honor of being the first freshman class onboarded in the midst of a federal government shutdown. And many were dismayed and surprised by how long the lines were at food banks, how many families were on the precipice of eviction. But you know that the average family does not even have $400 saved with which to weather a disruptive life event, that so many families were already living on the margins. In the Massachusetts 7th, which I represent, this is one of the most diverse, dynamic, vibrant districts in the country, and also one of the most unequal, where in a 3-mile radius, the gap in median income is $50,000 from the Back Bay to Roxbury, and life expectancy drops by 30 years. And that has everything to do with housing, because it is also a critical determinant, although I could not get the Secretary of HUD, Ben Carson, to agree when I questioned him, it is a critical determinant of public health. So these disparities are mirrored in the way that our twin public health and economic crises have unfolded and exacerbated a third underlying crisis, and that is our housing crisis. So I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say that housing is a human right. I just don't think that we can affirm that enough. And COVID-19 has made it absolutely clear that housing is also a critical determinant of our health and wellness, and that is why we need more intersectional, encompassing solutions like a public banking option, which would address the critical structural issues within the banking system that have disproportionately burdened low-income communities. And our work must go beyond just solving for the pandemic. We need to use this opportunity to ensure, again, that we enter a reconstruction and we structure our government and economic system to foster a just financial society for all. For instance, we need the Federal Reserve to step up and heed the Humphrey-Hawkins Act, which requires efforts to reduce disparities in unemployment rates. Massachusetts has the highest unemployment rate in the country at 17.4%. And we know that within that, unemployment rates amongst Black and Latinx communities are the highest. So we need the Fed to act, to step up and heed the Humphrey-Hawkins Act, requiring efforts to reduce disparities in unemployment rates between marginalized labor groups and the overall population. And might I add, also while not standing in the way of a long overdue federal jobs guarantee. This work is interconnected, it's intersectional, and we cannot address our housing crisis if we do not address these other issues. Despite housing being a basic human need, America's housing market is built upon a foundation of discriminatory policies and practices, from the theft of land to redlining to overtaxing households to predatory lending that have made achieving or maintaining home ownership and building equity especially difficult for Black households. That's why I continue to bang the drum, and I appreciate your mentioning the need of student debt. This is a $1.6 trillion crisis. In Massachusetts, we have 855,000 federal borrowers. The average student is burdened by a minimum of $30,000 worth of debt. That is choking at their promise. That is affecting our ability to jumpstart our economy, to have an equitable economic recovery. And Black and Latinx students borrow and default more than any other student borrowers because of the discriminatory and draconian policies that I've just enumerated, which have stood in the way of our ability to build generational wealth. And, you know, we know that Boston Federal Reserve report, folks get tired of hearing it, but I'm going to keep saying it because the folks that are living it are the most tired. And the fact that the median net worth of a Black Bostonian household is $8 and Black home ownership rates are at a 50-year low as redlining and housing discrimination continue, which is also why I continue to fight alongside my colleagues on financial services to modernize the Community Reinvestment Act. You know, how is it that we can have banks passing 98% of these examinations and the practice of redlining still persists? So despite this, the Trump administration is actively working to dismantle measures to fight housing discrimination established through the Fair Housing Act, further expanding on, which was further expanded on and strengthened during the Obama administration. Now, before COVID-19, too many people were barely getting by, in some instances paying more than half of their income for their rent. If we want people to live in a healthy, safe, stable environment, we have to provide affordable housing, plus financial security, and not just during this pandemic. And so that's why I'm so honored to join alongside all of you for this conversation, albeit briefly, about what we need to do now, what work we need to do after the COVID-19 recovery to ensure everyone has more than just shelter, that they have the dignity of a home. and an equitable opportunity to achieve financial security. So I thank you for your partnership in the work of housing justice. My office and I will continue to be partners in this work. I am so sorry for the technical difficulties which made it challenging for me to physically be a part of this virtual community and platform. And I hope you will have me back. I'm certain you have other more specific questions on the policy front, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to join you for a few moments.
We will absolutely have you back. Thank you so much for sticking with us through the technical problems. Apologies for that to everyone. And thank you incredibly for your time today and your precious minutes before departing to go pay your respects to Representative Lewis's body who has just arrived there. We appreciate your time today, and especially we appreciate your relentless efforts on behalf of families and individuals in need in the Commonwealth, and really all families and individuals who live on the margins and who are in vulnerable communities. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for being here, and we appreciate it during these especially busy times.
Thank you. Looking forward to our continued partnership in this work. Appreciate you all immensely. Be well.
You too. Thanks so much. David, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Kimberly, and thank you, Congresswoman Presley. I can't think of a better way to kick off this panel than those remarks, and very well put. And she covered a lot of really germane topics for this conversation, so I'm looking forward to diving into it. At this time, if I could ask my fellow panelists to turn their cameras on and come off mute, and we can, without further ado, we're starting a little bit late. I want to make sure we have time to hear from everyone. So I'm going to just dive straight into the questions and kind of let everyone have a chance to weigh in. Just as a quick reminder, so the first question to kind of kick us off, is thinking about a little bit about like where we are now and what's happened since March to this point. What have been the most effective policy responses so far that you've seen at the federal, state, or local level? What has not worked out as you thought? What needs to be doubled down on? What needs to be changed, or we completely missed the boat on? And where are folks, your constituents? Where do you see them right now? What are their struggles? To kind of tee us up for the next round of questions on where we should go next. And anyone can feel free to jump in however you want.
Great. Well, David, thank you so much. This is Senator Amy Eldridge. Hopefully you can hear me. Wonderful to hear from Congresswoman Presley, and honored to be on this panel with Councilor Lydia Edwards, who's just doing absolutely amazing economic and racial equality work in the city of Boston. And great to have Sarah Kugler from Senator Warren's office. So I would just say, in terms of what I'm hearing the most from my constituents is, even though state passed and the speaker has extended that.
I think, sorry to interrupt, Senator Eldridge. I think we have a little bit of noise in the background. If somebody might be unmuted, if they could mute, so we can make sure we can hear your remarks. Yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, I was wondering who that was. So I'm glad that we've done that, and Governor Baker just extended the moratorium to mid-October. But I'm already talking to so many constituents that are already not, paying their rent, to what Congresswoman Presley highlighted. And I represent 14 communities, pretty much upper middle class, a couple of working class communities. And, I'd say about half the towns have set up rental assistance funds. The reality is, that's reaching maybe dozens of residents in those towns, so nowhere near, the need for what's going on in the state or in my district. So I would just say, from a financial perspective, I'm grateful for the federal CARES Act. I hope the HEROES Act can get through the U.S. Senate, but there's a role for the state to play as well. I've been a very vocal proponent of passing a progressive tax package and finding a way to provide upfront financial assistance some form of universal basic assistance or guaranteed income. Related to the fact that the CARES Act did not provide any money for undocumented immigrants, whether through unemployment or the stimulus checks, is that I did file the Immigrant Taxpayers Equality Act that would have provided the same stimulus to undocumented immigrants and their family members. I hope that becomes law, but even if it does, that's $1,200 per person, $2,400 per family, dependents, additional $500. So it's really nowhere near enough. So I really am trying to encourage my colleagues in the legislature that there's a role for the state as well. We don't have deficit spending power, but we really should be raising taxes because we remain one of the wealthiest states in the country, and providing this level of assistance, because if we don't, it's just pushing more people to find different ways to make money to provide their families. That's contributing to some of the rising statistics around COVID-19 in Massachusetts, which is deeply concerning given that we've been a model for the nation. So I would say that front, and then Councillor Edwards has done amazing work on housing stabilization and housing policy, including some of the state bills that I would like to see passed. So I won't talk too much about that, but we absolutely need to pass more robust housing policy, whether it's rent control, whether it's right of refusal for tenants. And the House is debating an economic development bill today, which I hope some of those bills, many of which Councillor Edwards has crafted and championed, become law in the House Economic Development Bill, because economic development is not going to flourish if people are housing unstable or financially unstable. So those are some of the things I'm focused on. And again, I just think there's a role for the state to act, and respectfully, I don't think the state or the legislature has acted very boldly.
I'll go next, having been mentioned by my friend, Senator Eldridge, and also it's always an honor to speak after my former colleague on the Boston City Council, now Congresswoman Ayana Presley. I got to have a year with her while she was still a city councilor, and before she became a Congresswoman, but I'd known her for years before then. On this particular issue, there's the kind of pre-COVID analysis and snap or picture. What was working, what wasn't working. And there are a couple things, at the municipal level, and that's where a lot of folks forget that there's a lot of things that we can do at the municipal level. We're where the actual laws actually can be implemented. In many cases, you could have all the great state laws and rights come out of the state house, but if you don't have a willing municipal partner to inform people about their rights, to make sure that they're put in different languages, to literally go door knocking, to do robocalls to tell people about their rights. We do, the Office of Housing Stability, for example, sends out notices to folks about their rights in condo conversion. So if the building's bought, here are your rights, call us, all of these different things. So that's one thing that folks and cities have done well. Another thing that I'm very proud of Boston for doing well is regulating short-term rentals. We took on directly the short-term rental, which I think was exasperating a lot of the housing crisis within our community in Boston. And so we took them on, they sued us, and we ultimately settled where we do get to regulate them and keep them to what they were supposed to be, which is just supposed to be side income for homeowners instead of mini hotels, which is what they became. There's also just the right to counsel, which is a bill that is pending for the statewide, but there was a pilot program actually in Quincy done with Greater Boston Legal Services, and we've looked at different ways in which the city could support that as well by providing night clinics or legal clinics for folks to know their rights, either before they have to go to housing court. The worst thing that happens is a majority of tenants, I think I've heard as high as 80%, are not represented by an attorney. They walk in there with their children because they don't have daycare. They've taken off work. They have no idea what they're doing, and they want to get out of there as soon as possible. So they negotiate and they sign deals, giving up their rights that they didn't even know that they had. They don't know to appeal, they don't know to fight for, they don't know to negotiate. And so right to counsel, which is actually, we don't have it quite yet in Massachusetts, and I say yet because it's part of one of the package of wonderful amendments pending, but it did work in New York. And it demonstrated, I mean, evictions went down almost 80%, and people were, if they did have to leave, they left on better terms. They left on terms that they could navigate and understand. And so that, I think, is something that, again, at the municipal level, we could consider, but also statewide, would love the funding and the right in general, and then allow for cities and towns to come up with what they needed to with nonprofits. Other things that have worked in other cities is the transfer fee. A transfer fee that we're still hoping to get in Boston, but it's the Millionaires Tax or Mansion Tax in New York. And I think other 38 cities and towns, 38 states, and then I don't know, 4 additional cities have a version of the transfer fee. This is a wonderful way to generate income to help pay for rental assistance if you needed some in the middle of a pandemic, to pay for down payment assistance, to subsidize buildings that are being built and are way too expensive for the average person. We need income, we need funding directly, and coming from the general funds isn't going to cut it. And it depends on if you have a federal or state partner. I would say more federal than anything when it comes to housing. And if you don't have a federal partner and you're heavily reliant on the federal funds, as a city, you're guaranteed you won't be able to do much. We could barely even redo our own public housing. So the other thing that I think that's important for folks to do at the municipal level is to plan and to think about, envision a city or a town with all incomes that is intentionally integrated. And that's important because zoning and planning has been the most effective tool at segregating populations on income and race. And so I have drafted an amendment. We're negotiating with the administration to create the first zoning amendment that affirmatively furthers fair housing. And it would be, I believe, the first in the country that does that at the municipal level, and basically says to the city is telling developers, you come here, we will tell you where you're buying in historically exclusive or places that are dealing with a displacement crisis. And it is your job not to just make money, but to make a building or to develop, sure that we affirmatively further for housing and heal. We cannot just come here and make it worse. And that's a huge burden, but it's also one that is part of our law since 1968. So again, like I said, at the municipal level, our job is to make these laws real and to hold them accountable and to use whatever strength that we can. And zoning is by far an incredible strength because it's how you can regulate the private market in ways that other laws can't. So I'll stop there. But I'm very passionate about this. We have all sorts of laws, but I was a legal services attorney before I was a city councilor. So at the end of the day, this is I deal with and have dealt with the end result of unfair, horrible housing policy that forgets our poor, most vulnerable people.
Well, thanks so much. I'm happy to be here on behalf of Senator Warren. And I just want to start by extending her thanks to Senator Eldridge and Councilor Edwards. Senator Warren is so grateful for your leadership and for your partnership, in particular on important issues affecting Massachusetts families and consumers, including Senator Eldridge, your work on debt collection protections, and Councilor Edwards, your work on affordable housing and just housing, which, you know, the senator is in Congress fighting for these things on the federal level. I want to highlight just 2 critical, very effective federal policy responses, but unfortunately, one has already expired last Friday, and one is going to expire this Friday. So the first is the federal eviction moratorium, which protected more than 12 million renters from losing their homes in the middle of the pandemic. The CARES Act also included a foreclosure moratorium and forbearance protections to help homeowners stay in their homes. And there has been some federal action to extend those protections for homeowners, but right now renters are just left in the cold. And to follow up on Senator Eldridge and Councilor Edwards' points, the state municipal action has been a lifeline for families. Even before the eviction moratorium expired in the CARES Act, it only covered an estimated 30% of renters, so that other 70% of renters were fully reliant on their state or municipality taking action and providing them a moratorium. Unfortunately, that eviction moratorium, despite the attempts of my boss and other Democrats in the Senate and in the House to pass it before it expired at midnight on Friday. So right now, folks in Massachusetts are just covered by the extended state moratorium. The other effective policy intervention so far is unemployment and expansion and extension of unemployment insurance. Congress worked in the CARES Act to expand unemployment benefits so that on average they cover 100% of someone's lost wages instead of just 50%, which is normally what unemployment will cover. And Congress also stood up an emergency unemployment assistance program, pandemic unemployment assistance, to cover workers who normally aren't covered by regular unemployment benefits. So that's folks like people in the gig economy who are cut out of unemployment insurance, that covers self-employed folks, and also folks who, because of pandemic circumstances, normally wouldn't apply for regular unemployment in the state, but are out of work and need support. And Congress also provided an extra $600 per month or per week for every worker, and that is what gets folks up to that 100% wage replacement. Unfortunately, that extra $600 expires at midnight on Friday. So unless Senate Republicans come to the table, it's going to cut millions of folks' lifeline in half. And that is not just a moral failure to help folks, protect folks, and keep them financially stable, able to keep the lights on and feed their families during this pandemic. It's also bad for the economy. It's bad economic policy. That $600 has created a bump in consumer activity. Folks are paying their bills, but also putting that money back into the economy, which is helping keep our entire economy afloat. So when you cut out that $600, you're directly harming families, but you're also taking a big hit to the economy that's absolutely unnecessary. So those, I think, are the two federal responses I want to highlight, but also that we're in grave danger. We've already lost one and are running up against losing the next one at the end of the week.
Thank you, Sarah, and to all our panelists. That was a great recap of kind of what the response has been so far and the current state of play. I'm going to dive into our next question, and we're going to try to do at least one or two more questions, but I want to let our participants know we also want to have some time set aside for your questions as well. So if you have questions for the panelists, please just use the Q&A function and drop your questions in there. And then after another question or two here, we'll turn to your questions and we'll try to cover some of them as well. Covered quite the waterfront of issues on that last question of kind of where we're at now. One thing that I would dive a little bit deeper into and would love to hear panelists' thoughts, two subjects that we didn't cover as extensively. One that I know Massachusetts has been a leader on is around emergency savings or individual development account programs, IDA programs, or also known as MSPs, match savings programs. You know, a lot of these programs have been around for a while to kind of help lower and moderate income families, build match savings for a variety of purposes around, a down payment on a home or higher education or starting a business. And a lot of these programs across the country, I know, have been pivoted to kind of become emergency savings funds that have become a real lifeline for families. I think everyone here is familiar with, the Federal Reserve statistic about the $400 in savings rate, that almost 40% of families don't even have $400, which is obviously not a good thing in a normal economy, let alone in, kind of the crisis we're facing now, which is very unique in nature. Would love to hear anybody's thoughts about that. And then the other topic, folks want to comment on that. The other one they could comment on is, we could dive a little bit deeper into the debt side. So thinking about beyond kind of potential mortgage debt, debt collection is a huge issue for folks. Even the stimulus payments, we found out at the federal level, the Treasury Department failed to use its authority to prevent banks from garnishing the stimulus payments that some folks received if they had debts available. But obviously it gets much bigger than that. We can get into payday lending. We can think about student loans and so forth. So we'd love to hear any thoughts about at the federal, state, or local level about what needs to be done or is in motion already. Oh.
I'm muted. Forgive me. Thanks, David. I was just going to say on the IDA program, just so people have a sense at the state level, is that so Midas was really the leader. Obviously, its mission, but also was the leader in getting the state to funds to provide a state match to IDAs. But this was before the 2008 recession. So back in 2006. I worked with the previous director of Midas, Margaret Miley, to establish the Asset Development Commission to look at equity issues and asset development issues in the whole state. And out of that, we were able to convince, I was a state representative back then, to provide $500,000 match to IDA programs across the state. So it was a very encouraging effort that I thought, had a great amount of momentum. And then because of the 2008 recession, you saw very deep budget cuts at the state level that included eliminating that program. So I would love to get back to that. Again, that's where, our need to raise revenue at the state level is so necessary, because that state match no longer exists. It would be obviously great to have federal support as well. And, on the emergency funds front, and I talked about a little bit earlier, is that about half of my communities have created rental assistance funds. Some of those have been from CARES Act funding. Some, interestingly, have been from Community Preservation Act funding, part of which can go towards affordable housing. So towns have directed, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 for rental assistance. But again, it's only servicing, on the order of dozens of people in individual communities I represent. So it's not really reaching people. And there's obviously barriers around, immigrant status, race, ethnicity that, limit who is actually benefiting. On the debt collection front, and I appreciate, Sarah noting the debt collection bill that I have filed that has been reported favorably out of committee to actually finally regulate debt collection in Massachusetts. So to regulate how much a debt collector can take if they go to court from a person's income, to limit the so-called debtors courts, where people literally are still going to jail based on a warrant when they don't show up for court, and are actually go to jail to pay off part of their debt, which is deeply outrageous. As well as to put some statute of limitations into how long debt collectors can pursue debts. Because what we know what debt collectors do, and it's a strategy, is they tend to target, poor working class people that may not, for a variety of reasons, may not remember that they actually paid off that debt, and suddenly they get a letter in the mail that they owe $500 or $1,000, and they're just paying off that debt. So that statute of limitations would prohibit, such letters going out. So that's a major bill that's passed the Senate the past two sessions. We're hoping to get it into the economic development bill in the Senate this week. But certainly, if you look at the debts people are incurring now because of the pandemic, this kind of legislation is needed now more than ever. And I think you're going to see it affect, the 99%, middle-class families as well, who are really falling behind. So there's, again, need for state action, and bills have movement, but they still haven't become law yet. Thanks.
At the city level, I mean, I can't speak to direct debt legislation, but there have been certain actions we've been taking to help alleviate obstacles, to education, which student loan debt, I think, is one of the biggest ones. And then also trying to make sure that we eliminate or at least make what was the other one? Oh yes, banking institutions, making sure that they treat our constituents with equity. So one is there was a plan introduced by Mayor Walsh to allow for easier transition, if not a direct admission into community college, so that your last year of high school could also be earning you credits in community college. What does that do for some kids? I think it makes debt and access to college, it lowers both. Hopefully allowing them to go to Bunker Hill College as part of BPS schools and Boston Public Schools, and allowing them to transition almost, and it was supposed to be that the plan was supposed to, and could work, that you are basically going for free to community college. If you graduated from BPS schools. That's I think is something that a lot of municipal entities need to look at. And the other one was looking at fair banking and how, it's a lot of the debt is because a lot of predatory lenders are in communities of color and working class communities, even in Boston. So you'll find more check cash places in certain communities than you will in other places. So the issue is pushing on the banking institutions to be available and accessible, and to demonstrate their data of who they're loaning to, on what terms,
and for us as the city of Boston to use our purse strings to say, if we're finding that there's a bad actor, we should not be doing business with that particular banking institution. They should not be benefiting from the billions of dollars that we have. And that's part of the conversation for investment and divestment that we've been having at a grander scale, but just looking directly at who we choose to bank with, and then holding them to a standard of equity and good treatment of all of our Bostonians is, I think, the power of the municipal purse, even the power of the state purse too. But I think at the local level, that's one way in which you can attack debt, attack predatory lenders who are in your community, and then through the public or access to community college, streamlining that and ensuring that people have to take on less debt and get college credits is two ways.
Just to follow up on the housing piece, Senator Warren has proposed the Protecting Renters from Evictions and Fees Act, which would extend the federal eviction moratorium through March of 2021, and would also expand it to cover every single renter, so that folks are protected from getting evicted for non-payment of rent. And that's really important because a lot of folks who were covered under the CARES Act federal moratorium didn't know they were covered because it is dependent on your landlord's mortgage, which is just hard for most renters to have access to or get access to. And so that we saw folks who were covered under the moratorium were getting evicted, even though they were protected. So the moratorium needs to expand to all renters, and the senator has a bill to do that. It would also prevent landlords from charging fines, fees, or other charges related to non-payment of rent, so that folks don't safely stay in their houses but rack up hundreds of dollars in fees from a landlord for not paying their rent, even though that was covered under a moratorium. She also supports Senator Brown's legislation to create a $100 billion emergency rental assistance fund. There is amazing rental assistance work, as you have heard about, on the state and local level that has, even pre-crisis, been really critical to provide housing stability for folks who don't need to get evicted just because they can't pay part of their rent on any given month. So Senator Brown's bill that Senator Warren supports would help renters make payments they've missed or help make future rent payments so that they can remain stably housed. Money would go directly to the landlord, so renters could stay current on their rent, stay in their homes, landlords would stay current, and families would stay safe. And I'll just kind of on a high level, Senator Warren has also proposed a comprehensive consumer relief proposal, essentially that it would allow consumers to put a pause on all payments during this pandemic and economic crisis. And I'll just highlight on a high level a few parts of that. One, like Counselor and Senator have talked about, is preventing debt collectors and banks from taking stimulus payments and prohibiting debt collectors from using predatory measures to collect debt, including garnishments and utility disconnections. Her proposal would also make sure folks don't get a hit to their credit from any negative entries during this crisis. And as I think everyone is aware, Senator Warren also believes we need to broadly cancel student loan debt and to extend the CARES Act protections, which were available just for federal student loan borrowers, to all student loan borrowers, including private student loan borrowers.
Thank you all. That was great. One, jumping to the Q&A, we had one question on a topic that hasn't come up yet around job training. I think, obviously a lot of jobs are not coming back anytime soon or coming back in limited capacity. Do you all know of any efforts at the federal, state, or local level around helping folks get job training if they want to pivot and they feel comfortable trying to get back into the workforce in a new way in order to kind of survive this crisis?
At the city level, we have a jobs trust fund. It needs to be increased through our linkage, which is also pending at the State House. So hopefully we'll vote for Amendment 9 today to get Boston's increase in linkage payments that allows to go to per square footage that's developed in commercial buildings. We put some money in for housing at about $9 and only $1 for job training. But what we've then have to do often is leverage the job training from developers, and they'll put in money to the jobs trust, or they'll assure that certain people will be trained on the larger developments such as Suffolk Downs, largest private development in Boston's history is in my district. And it'll be 14,000 construction jobs alone for 20 years. Or at the casino that was developed. It's really leveraging and making sure that there's
pipelines into not just the training, but pipelines into communities of color, into working class communities of all color, and making sure that we get folks hired and trained to work at these larger institutions that are coming into our cities.
I would just add, and I agree, I hope that Amendment 9 passes in the House today, and we'll see what happens to the Senate on Wednesday. You know, it's interesting, just sort of perspective, is the economic development bill. One of my frustrations is often a vehicle for tax breaks that I think more often than not go to large corporations. It looks like the House bill is going to include sports betting. But what are we doing to help, you know, working families? What are we doing around job training? And David, to your point, with the fact that a lot of people, you know, their jobs may no longer exist to go back to, you know, what are we thinking in terms of, you know, free vocational education for adults, free public college, and sort of the retraining that could happen over the next year or so as we're recovering from the pandemic. I have filed, once again, my free public college bill, which also includes free vocational school. There was an effort, the Cherish Act, to significantly reduce the cost of public higher education. So, you know, I don't think those things are going to pass this session, but does that, you know, does that lead to a bigger conversation around job training and public higher education, community colleges for next session? And for right now, to Councillor Edwards' point, you know, can we at least fill and increase state funding for job training programs that exist now in the economic development bill, in the state budget, which just so if folks haven't followed it, the plan would be we were going to do the state budget in the fall, so after the August break. So we absolutely need to do that. And, you know, having that discussion with elected officials, that if we just cut, not only is it going to hurt people, but it's not going to revive the economy. Government exists, obviously, especially at the federal level due to stimulus and deficit spending power, but there's a role for state and city and local governments to invest, to inject money, to create more job training, to create jobs, and really help people weather the storm of the pandemic. So I think there's momentum for bigger and bolder policies, but I would say for at least for the legislature right now, it's increasing these current programs with a push for next session.
And on the federal level, the HEROES Act, which passed the House, includes $2 billion in funding focused on providing resources for state and local workforce systems, and to enable small and medium-sized employers to provide on-the-job training and support. So that includes $485 million for adult training, with a particular emphasis on folks who were economically impacted by COVID-19 and the subsequent economic fallout, and $518 million for youth training programs that are like both in and out of school, and $597 million for dislocated worker employment and training. You know, in the Senate, we are still waiting for Senate Republicans to put forth their proposal for the next relief package. So we don't really have any insight yet into like what's next in negotiations, but it's certainly part of the HEROES Act, which provides a template for a lot of the things that Senate Democrats are fighting for in the next relief package.
Thank you all. So I just want to quickly note we've reached 1 o'clock. The conversation is going great though, and I just want to see if we can squeeze in a few more questions and go a little bit over 1 o'clock. I just want to flag that for folks. One other question that came in, which I think is particularly pertinent, is kind of thinking about what participants on this call can do, and just acknowledging that obviously all these different, we're covering a lot of terrain here. It's all very much interrelated and a little bit overwhelming, and just giving participants a sense of like, how do they prioritize and what's the best way for folks to kind of weigh in on their own to help address some of these important issues and these solutions that are kind of being flagged here right now.
Well, I would say just because the, you know, this is the last week of the official formal session for the legislature. Again, we really need to come back in the fall to get a number of key bills passed. But for this week, the House is debating, probably in a number of hours, the House Economic Development Bill. So there's a number of amendments around, housing stability, about job training, about equity community funds. So sort of recognizing whether you're talking about state contracting, whether you're talking about the cannabis industry, that there are so many aspects of government policy that, whether intentionally or not, exclude people of color from finding work or getting jobs. So there's a number of these amendments that are before the House right now. My sense is that a lot of these programs will be in the Senate Economic Development Bill, which is being drafted now, but will be debated on Wednesday. So, I would say the key message is, what are your legislators doing around equity, whether economic or racial equity, that if this is a bill that's going to include, allowing sports betting, allowing, tax credits, well, what is being done for working families? And the vast majority of policy and funding should be going to the 99% and not the top 1%. And every 2 years, I'm always concerned that often, those members of the public are an afterthought compared to these corporate special interests that drive this bill. So that's what I would say, communicating to state reps and state senators at the state level, and hopefully on the Senate side, we'll come up with an equity-focused bill.
Just to echo those bills, in case anyone was looking for the numbers, these are currently, many of them are amendments to a larger economic package. But again, before the crisis, we had an eviction crisis in the state of Massachusetts. 1 million people have an eviction record before COVID. And proposed was the Homes Act, which is an eviction sealing act that would seal records and allow people to move on with their lives. It's just very short. It's basically civil CORI reform or criminal justice reform. It allows people to seal their eviction records, and that's Amendment 449. The linkage, again, is Amendment 9. Right to counsel is Amendment 82. Tenant opportunity purchase, which is a right of first refusal for tenants to purchase at market rate, is Amendment 269. The local option for transfer fees is Amendment 286. These are all things that would be incredibly helpful to allow for our state to rebound and to move forward from this moment, because we were dealing with a housing crisis before this time. For those folks who may not be in the state of Massachusetts or have a representative to call, I think then if you're interested in housing justice, look around your towns, look around your neighborhoods, and ask yourself, how have they been planned? Who do you live around? Do you see segregation? And the first call I would then go is to your city planner, to your zoning amendment or zoning office, and ask them about how they're going to further fair housing at the local level. Put it to them that they have an obligation. The other thing I would finally say is I think if we're really concerned about wealth building and debt, removing of debt burdens, it really does come down to having pathways to ownership. A lot of the financial institutions are not creative in how they're going to loan. I think cooperatives is one way in which people could be getting access to funding, looking at tiny houses, looking at all these different ways in which people can be building different forms of homes that they can own, but there are very few financial incentives or very few financial tools or resources that are being offered by banks.
And just very quickly on the federal level, Senator Warren and Senator Markey are fighting really hard for progressive priorities to help keep families safe and stable in their houses and financially secure, and protect them from predatory consumer actions. But we always encourage you to write in and contact our office and push for your priorities. And I think that, it is always useful for folks to, share their stories, to advocate publicly about why these priorities are so important. As you all know, like, Democrats have been fighting to pass another Relief Act, like, very soon after the CARES Act passed. The HEROES Act passed the House, and we've been waiting for more than a month for Senate Republicans to take any action on the bill. And they just said that they're starting last week. you know, it's Monday, we still don't have any text from them as kind of like a starting point for negotiations. So, you know, I think the louder and more folks in the Senate, both sides of the aisle hear how important this is. It's helpful to make sure that we get a relief bill on the table as soon as possible, especially before, for example, that this Friday at midnight deadline comes for that extra $600 in unemployment insurance, which is just absolutely critical for families and absolutely critical for the economy. You know, we are well past the point that we needed another federal relief bill, as I'm sure Councilor Edwards and Senator Eldridge are more than aware, waiting for critical resources to keep folks safe on the ground. So, and anything to, you know, continue to push folks in the Senate to get a bill on the table as soon as possible and move this forward is something my boss has been fighting for and calling for. And, you know, the more senators hear from folks in the state and across the country, the better.
Thank you. And one additional question we have regarding rent cancellation bills in the House and kind of their status. You know, as it was acknowledged earlier, you know, there are rental assistance programs, but they have limitations. And I think this issue of, you know, having all the rent come due after a moratorium is real concerning, but obviously for tenants and for smaller landlords too could be a big issue. Any thoughts, updates on that bill, or additional thoughts about thinking about rent cancellation for folks and who are struggling right now, but thinking about how, you know, it's just putting off obviously a huge kind of end at some point where it could lead to crushing debt on folks at a later date.
Sure. I certainly support state efforts for rent cancellation. I think the challenge again is just that it's estimated we have a $3 billion shortfall in state revenues, and so, you know, I certainly support raising state taxes through a progressive manner, but otherwise I think it'll be difficult for the legislature to pass that right now.
I think at the local level, because we really probably could not cancel rent at the city level, there's a lot of discussion though about how, you know, in order to bring landlords to the table, because this term, I can assure you, makes more landlords leave than come to the table, even though it's, you know, the assumption is that they're going to lose their homes while the tenants have a place to live. And I think that that's been a very false narrative. The fact is, when I hear cancel rent, I hear cancel financial debt and obligations, not just to landlords, but to banks as well. And so I'd really like for a lot of this legislation and a lot of the control to be put on the banks, because at the end of the day, those are the ones holding the mortgage notes. And it's really, those are the ones who need to be regulated at this time. And to Mayor Walsh's credit, he got 12 large banks to agree in the city of Boston for those properties that they have mortgages to allow for, I think it was 3 or 4 months of mortgage payments to be added to the end of the life of the mortgage. So in the 30 years, and that's a huge win, but I want to make sure that when we provide that kind of relief to landlords, it doesn't trickle, it pours down to the tenants. So that if I am allowed as a landlord to wait 3 months to pay rent at the end of the life of my mortgage, then that relief should be pushed down to my tenants, and they're made aware of that, so that they also have a break for the 2 or 3 months that I have a break. So it's really connecting the two so that we're not creating false narratives or false enemies or against each other. The fact is, at the end of the day, there's someone usually on the other side of that. And then for landlords who may not have a mortgage, well, first of all, congratulations. But also, secondly, there are some smaller pots of money that the state could pull together, so the pot isn't as large if you're trying to pay everyone's mortgage note, versus if you have those people who own their homes outright, have a smaller amount to help them if they're on Social Security, or help them with whatever bills they need to pay. But I think it's just very important for us today to realize who has the financial power and incentives, and not pit the landlords and tenants against each other.
Very well put. Thank you for that. So we're at 1:10. I want to be respectful of everyone's time and try to wrap things up, but I do want to give our panelists kind of a last comment. And I would, you know, my question to the panelists is anything that we didn't cover that you'd love to chime in on, or future directions. You know, as the moderator's prerogative, I will say one thing, kind of echoing the last question and several others, is, you know, I think the lack of funding for state and localities that's coming at the federal level is a huge thing that, you know, I think needs to be addressed. and I doubt there'll be much disagreement on this call. The HEROES Act obviously addresses that. So far, the Senate bill does not, unfortunately, as far as we know. So hopefully that'll be remedied. But I think that is one huge thing, responsibility the federal level needs to step on. But I would love to give my fellow panelists kind of final thoughts on next directions or anything left unaddressed.
Yeah, well, thank you, David. Again, thank you for Kimberly for inviting us. And I think what I would just say is that, you know, what I think I've seen in the legislature this year is that the sort of triple threat of the pandemic, police brutality, racial injustice, and I think also climate change from an equity lens, I think has really changed the conversation at the State House, where you're already seeing a number of bills sort of include equity, both economic and racial equity. Whether, you know, our state budget, obviously the police reform, racial justice bill, the climate change legislation, hopefully the economic development bill. So, you know, let's keep that going and sort of build that momentum for next session so that we can really, you know, pass these even bolder ideas that are so necessary. So I think things really have changed, and that's with some of my colleagues that, you know, aren't as focused on these things. So that's certainly something I'm encouraged by. The Massachusetts legislature really should be a leader in all these issues. I think it's sort of been in the middle of the pack. So I hope that changes between today and in January. So, but thanks so much for having me.
Well, honestly, I think while there is a lot of issues out there, I think we should see this moment for the opportunity that it is. We should understand that we are able to question and look at all the systems that we've had and restructure them differently. We don't have a choice, and COVID has really exposed that. You know, the fact that our wages have been so stagnant that it's actually more, people are more incentivized not to work because unemployment is paying them more than the wages that have not kept up with the real costs. The fact that we have seen such healthcare disparities that people who are poor, who are Black, who are Latinx are more likely to die of this disease. That's because we've seen the disparities, but also because we have a lack of real access to insurance, health insurance in this country. And we need to question that. I mean, look at Medicare for All, look at all of these different opportunities that are available to us quite seriously. And then finally, look at the fact that our housing, that our crisis is only going to be, we're pouring gasoline on an already very 9-alarm fire right now with COVID. And so the question for us is really, can we afford to walk away from real conversations about rent control, from real conversations about cooperatives or rights to purchase, or even right to counsel if you're in housing court? We don't get to pretend that that's not going to be an issue, that a tsunami of evictions isn't coming our way. We don't get to pretend, we don't get to walk away, not just as policymakers, but as a society. And shame on us if we allow for that to happen and the increase in homelessness and family homelessness goes up and we act as though we didn't know it was coming. I think this is an opportunity. We're having conversations about the police, about housing, about healthcare, about wages that we just didn't before. Or we're thrown off as some crazy lefties who don't have aren't dealing with reality. And if a lot of us would say, if you had listened to us before, you wouldn't be dealing with this reality. So I just want to say, to the crazy lefty friend of mine, Senator Eldridge, who's been in the good fight. First of all, you gave me a lot of time to look up all those budget numbers. Thank you. But also, and to my crazy other senator, the represented here by Sarah, Elizabeth Warren, I just have to say thank you both. Keep pushing and keep fighting in your houses respectively. I'll keep doing my work over here. I just know that, we see this for the opportunity that it is to help as many people as possible. And I hope a lot of people do as well.
Thanks. And again, thanks to the Midas Collaborative. Really an honor to share space with Councilor Edwards and Senator Eldridge and the Senator's great partner in the fight in Congress, Congresswoman Presley. I want to offer one really narrow a really narrow answer to your question. One extraordinarily urgent, overdue policy response that Senator Warren has been fighting for is an OSHA emergency temporary standard. Right now, workers don't have any enforceable safety standards on the job. The CDC has issued guidance, but guidance is not enforceable, which means it's, providing protection in name, but workers can't take that protection to the bank. OSHA has issued less than a handful of citations related to this pandemic. Workers are getting sick and dying. And the Department of Labor has told my boss and other members of Congress that there is no need for an emergency temporary standard, no need for enforceable, worker protections, because companies are doing the right thing. But even a cursory review of what's happening at meatpacking facilities and Amazon warehouses and other workplaces make it clear that that's just not true. And we know that communities of color and low-income workers are overrepresented in the folks classified as essential workers who are on the job, taking on that additional risk every day in their workplaces, and are also most at risk from the failure to implement these enforceable safety standards. Compelling an OSHA ETS would create enforceable standards that would protect workers. It would also give businesses clear guidance about how to keep workers safe, so that businesses who are trying to do the right thing have a little more support in doing it, and also aren't competing against businesses who aren't doing the right thing. So it makes a fair playing field for all businesses and companies. It would also let consumers know that businesses have clear safety standards in place, which would make consumers feel safer if and when they're ready to go to businesses and make purchases. That's actually good for the economy, because consumers won't go and spend money at businesses if they don't feel safe. So rushing to reopen businesses alone won't spur the economy into a recovery if consumers don't show up at those businesses and spend money. So there is no good reason not to enforce or not to create an emergency temporary standard, and there's every good reason to do so. Senator Warren called for OSHA emergency temporary standard and enforceable health and safety protections for all essential workers as part of her Essential Workers Bill of Rights. And she strongly supports a bill by by Senators Baldwin and Duckworth, the Every Worker Protection Act, which would compel OSHA to issue that standard as soon as possible, and then to create a permanent standard not too long thereafter.
Well, thank you so much to all our panelists. That's a great way to wrap things up. And thank you to all the participants as well for joining us today. What a wonderful conversation. And of course, a big thank you to the Midas Collective for organizing this and bringing us all together today. I will hand it over to Kimberly now to close us out.
Again, just many thanks to the attendees who remained on the call after the 1 o'clock hour. We still have a great group there. To all the panelists, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Jamie. And thank you to Ayana, Presley, and Absentia. I also want to recognize and thank David for his heroic efforts moderating today in the face of some difficulties with the technology. And we appreciate our long-term partnership with Prosperity Now, doing very similar things at the federal level that Midas is doing at the state level. We're receiving lots of thank yous in the chats, so I just want to let the panelists and the moderator know that. And we will have a recording available and sent out to everyone who participated today. Thank you again from Midas and everyone.
Take care. Thanks so much.
Bye.